Chuck, it's been a while. What's going on? What's new? What's happening?
Everything is well. I'm excited to be back here on the HR Stories podcast. The HR world is changing and it's staying the same.
Okay.
Never, ever is there a shortage of stories and fun things to dig into.
Now, you know what? I agree with you 100%. Like, we probably talk once, maybe twice a week about something that's happening in HR. Like, oh, did you see this? Or send this article and that kind of stuff. And it just never ends, right? I'm hearing all these different things and what we should be doing. And I have a brief story that Susan Lucas shared on Incorporated, an Inc. that leads into our story.
Okay, go for it.
So I don't know if you read it, right? And so she was talking about this Reddit post where somebody who got a job and started working in mid-shift, the owner or the manager says, you know what, this job's not for you. Not going to work out. You're fired.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of like, what? Why? Wait, why are we firing that person? And her point of view was, well, if you know that person's not going to be successful in your workplace, then yeah, you shouldn't keep them around. And I do agree with that. I think that's really important, that kind of stuff. But I also see the other side is like the manager should be training the employee. They're not going to be perfect on day one. Right? Yeah. It should be expectation that they're going to be perfect on day one. And the manager is responsible for hiring. So how did this person get hired if they're not going to be, right? So again, lots of things and kind of thinking about all that stuff, I think becomes important. Anyway, so today's story, Chuck.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, good. The firing is the headline. The culture is the story.
Okay. Intriguing.
Yeah, so have you ever walked into a workplace and immediately thought, how is this place still operating? Yeah. Maybe deadlines are missed, customers are frustrated, people are doing whatever they want, yet somehow the organization keeps moving forward. Today's story is about an entrepreneur who brought an automobile repair shop and, according to accounts, fired the entire staff.
Oh, yeah.
The story exploded online. Some people praised the decisions, others criticized it. But I think both groups were missing the most important lesson.
Yeah, and I will say, yes. Have I walked in? Exactly. It's like, how do these people stay in business? I've seen that constantly. And, the story from Inc. about the employee fired half day in, I will tell you that there's always a gut feeling that someone's not going to make it. And that's a bold move. And sometimes maybe I might salute that. A lot of times we wait too long. Person's there for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And it's just way too long. So
yeah, it's funny.
In a way, I like that.
It's funny that you say that, Chuck, because there's so many times I've said to managers, they're not going to get better, right? If during the first couple of months, if they're doing things wrong and you're not telling them, they're not automatically going to be like, oh, you want me to do it a different way, right? And so again, training, oversight, leadership, all important in there.
Yeah, well, what I see is, they're late, they're on their phone. They're not doing their work. They're on a personal phone. You talk about, maybe there's grooming guidelines or appearance guidelines. They basically ignore. And so you just start to see this pattern as emerge. And there's always this hope that they will change. And I got to tell you, maybe that's a good idea. Just that bold move. So, this story you brought to my attention that we're talking about today, I know it's easy to say, the firing of people, but it really isn't about firing people or terminating people. We're not really going to talk as much about the legal side of things. This is more about, once again, making workplaces better, making your workplace better. It's about leadership, accountability. It's about culture and what happens when those problems are ignored too long.
Yeah. And so here's the story. According to Brian Beers, he purchased a struggling auto repair shop near Philadelphia. On his first day, he arrived early and noticed a truck parked outside. He assumed it belonged to a customer. He was excited the customer's already there. A few minutes later, a man climbed out, unlocked the buildings, and Beers realized it was the store manager. The story only got worse from there. Employees reported disappearance for extended lunches. Standards were inconsistent. Accountability was weak. Leadership appeared absent, yet the phones kept ringing and the customers kept showing up. That detail matters, right? Because demand was strong, the market wasn't broken, the workplace was. And what I didn't say in that part of the story was the manager climbs out, is disheveled, smelling like alcohol, had slept in his truck the night before, had been out doing other jobs. And so here he shows up, not really setting a great example for his team, kind of getting in there.
Yeah. So basically you're saying the demand was strong and the market wasn't broken. So, that's an important distinction. A lot of organizations think that they have a strategy problem when they have a culture problem.
Yeah. And so our first lesson, right? Always the lesson in the story. The first lesson today is culture always shows up in performance. Leaders often tell themselves our culture isn't great, but our results are fine. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. Culture always shows up somewhere. It may show up in turnover, customer complaints, quality issues, burnout, safety incidents, profitability. Sometimes success simply masks the problem for a while.
You're right.
Right? And so I think that's kind of the lesson we have to always think about. Like, just because it's not impacting everything, it's impacting something.
Look, I've seen it over time. Money covers a lot of flaws. What I mean by that is if a company's just for some reason just hidden it, right? It's the right time at the right place with the right product and the market is great. I don't know. And they're just making a lot of money. Usually you don't see a lot of those culture problems as much. Oh yeah, there's turnover. Who cares? We're making so much money. We're so successful. We're so great. But when that starts to dry up, and it could be, it's just a lull, right? A cyclical lull in the business. And when that lull goes down and all of a sudden the money flow dries up, you start to realize there's lots of cracks and flaws.
Yeah. And I think, again, right, that's the leadership mentality. Hey, we're profitable. We're making 10% over 10%. But if you're not digging in and looking at why are these decisions being made, what is the quality of decisions in that place, it kind of falls apart, right?
Yeah.
All right. So lesson number 2, the real issue is often tolerance. Let me get to this, right?
Yeah.
The question I keep asking myself wasn't, why were the employees behaving this way? Right? Never my question. The question was, how did leadership allow it to continue? Even unhealthy culture has a tolerance level. At some point, someone saw a problem and chose not to address it.
Yeah. And so there we go. When leaders and managers tolerate certain things and they tolerate lackadaisical or lollygagging, there's a good word, lollygagging, right? That becomes the new standard. And it's not the mission statement. It's not the values on the wall. The actual standard is whatever behavior is continuing without consequence. And that's basically like kind of a de facto support for those behaviors, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier attendance, and this is where it came to my mind. If people are late, that means a boss somewhere is saying, that's all right. It's acceptable.
Yeah.
Right. I remember one of my first true manager jobs, and I had an employee that would come in 45 minutes late. And I kept talking to him. But there was no consequences behind my action. Mm-hmm. And it was in that situation that he didn't change. There was nothing that was going to change about him because I didn't offer any consequences. I felt I was beholden to that person. I probably wasn't. Right. And so kind of looking at that becomes in there. And so I think we have to talk about the termination, right? The termination question. Now let's talk about the part everyone focused on, right? Everyone was focused on firing. I don't think we should dismiss it. In fact, I think some leaders wait far too long to make that difficult decision. You were saying that just earlier, right?
Yeah.
I was in a conference on, what's today? A couple days ago. And I was doing what I love to do. I was doing these strategic conversations with the team. And afterwards, I was talking to the director of the department, and we were talking about one of those employees. And it wasn't that she was a bad employee, but she had a very particular take on how things should be run. And so I challenged the leader, is that the right person for you to move your team forward?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know enough about the team. I was only working with this team for a day, but I got the sense from her expression that she was like, well, maybe not, right? And so kind of looking at that becomes important. So I've seen organizations spend years coaching someone who is clearly damaging the team. Sometimes I will get requests like, can you coach this person? I don't like to do it, right? And I'm like, well, do you think they're going to get better? What does the outcome? And I'll talk to that person, and usually those individuals don't want to be coached. And then I'll call the company, and I'm like, I'm not coaching them. You can find somebody who'll coach them because people are desperate for money or whatever, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it because I know there's not going to be a good outcome. And I don't want that tarnishing my thing. So what happens is we don't deal with this individual. The high performers are still there, but morale starts to decline. Customers start to service. At some point, refusing the act becomes a leadership failure all of its own.
Yeah. So I know the firing, and people do focus on the firing because this is a story where a guy takes over a business, says, oh my gosh, this is not what I represent. You're all gone. We're starting from the beginning. And I know people are focused on that. And I would be too, in a way, right? That's like, whoa, in your face. You're digging into it more about culture and leadership. I will tell you where I've seen this in action during times where there's a merger and acquisition. And let's say I work for a company or a hotel. And we're being bought by another company. And so another ownership. And the ownership will come to us and they'll say, okay, everyone gets a fresh start here. Everyone has to reapply and all that great stuff. But we're going to basically take everyone on board with us into the new company unless or except, is there anyone here that you think we should not move forward with? And there are those employees, John, that have been clinger-oners, that have been disruptors in a negative way, that have not followed the line of the company culture and all that stuff. And, there have been times where I say, okay, look, let's talk about these 5 or 6 people. And so on decision day, when you're switching from one ownership to the other, we will pull these folks in and say, I'm sorry, but we're not taking you forward to the new company. And so I've seen that happen in action. So I just did want to throw that out to you that I know that's not the crux of the direction you're going here, but it can fix temporarily some things depending on how the culture in the new company is. And
well, and I think that's part of it, right? I think when you're in that process and I'm taking over a company and I'm looking at it, I want this company to move forward with the people that matter, right? The people that are going to do really well and that kind of stuff. And I also want people that are going to fit my culture and fit my attitude and fit what we represent. If there are people that don't do that, why would I bring them on? They're going to be that anchor. I don't want that anchor, right? They're going to hold.
But I know you think people obviously, first of all, deserve a fair chance, correct?
I do, right? People do deserve a fair chance, but people do, right? So people do deserve a fair chance, but that only works if a manager is doing the following, right? Setting clear expectations, giving them the resources they need, providing proper feedback and coaching to the individuals, and there's an opportunity for them to improve, right? We're giving them that opportunity. Otherwise, maybe termination should happen, right? And so kind of looking at what other realities do you think we need to be thinking about, Chuck?
I think the fair chance is a big deal because, and I see that in HR, a lot of times I'm holding the line on, we need to take this person on a 60-day PIP and we need to say goodbye to them. Well, wait a second. You've already put the decision ahead. Okay. They deserve a fair chance. Have they been, did you go over this stuff in their review? Have you had these conversations? Well, we've had conversations, but okay. Have you, so, it is something that we in HR a lot of times are holding the line on because that termination may be premature, even if it could be legally backed.
And that's the thing. When you were talking, I was thinking about that consistency we always talk about in HR. You have to be consistent. You have to be consistent. Sometimes that's our job. Like, you don't have paperwork. We're not firing this person. Let's give them the 60 days. Let's work through it. Let's see what happens. If they get better, fantastic. If they don't, then we terminate.
Yeah. So I'm thinking also, John, the team the team also deserves some sort of protection, right? So
Yeah.
leaders have a responsibility to not only to not only that struggling employee, but they also have a responsibility to everyone else on the team. One person can create enormous drag on trust, productivity, customer service, efficiency. They become that friction that's kind of holding back the team.
Yeah, and you've seen that, right? I've seen that in action where you pull one member away and all of a sudden this just team blossoms and they're great and they're fantastic. And you're like, wow, just that one person changed everything. So I do think that's good. The other thing I would think about, Chuck, in terms of reality would be culture is defined by the consequences, right? And so people will do what they need to do, right? And so the values on the wall that you were talking about only become real when there are consequences for violating them. If accountability never occurs, values become decorations instead of expectations, right? They're on the wall, but we're not doing anything about it. There has to be accountability. We have to hold those individuals accountable. Otherwise, there's no culture.
Yeah. And this is going to sound odd, but sometimes it's the kind thing to do. And I'm big into leading by something called the fruit of the spirit, right? Kindness, gentleness, patience, self-control. Kindness is something that you might think, oh, I just have to be nice to everyone. Well, yes, but sometimes not every employee belongs in every role. And the kindest thing sometimes to do is the separation. Not every organization's the right fit. Sometimes separation isn't really a punishment. It might seem like that at first, but it's, this relationship is no longer working. And I have been through, depending on how you do it, I've actually been through these conversations, these terminations, where either at that point or several days or weeks later, that person comes back to me and say, you know what, Chuck, that was probably the best thing to do. It's not because that person was bad, like bad. They were breaking policies and procedures or anything like that. They just were not. It just wasn't a fit, and they were not happy. And so I think that's something to think about too. Is sometimes kindest thing to do is that separation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a really good point. And I look at that as like sometimes it's the best thing for that person to move away from the company, right? Especially when that person's been there extended period of time and they've got comfortable and they're not performing and they're not happy, but they don't know what to do because it is a lifeline. I get paid and I do that. And then all of a sudden, boom, I move on and oh, I am so much more happier in this job. It's the best thing for me. I love it, and blah, 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 right? And they come back, they talk to you about it, and you're like, oh my goodness, thank goodness I hear that.
Well, also, John, fire people is not always a culture strategy
Yeah.
either. So
this is lesson number 3, right?
Lesson number 3, right? So I gotta tell you a story about my old days at Universal Studios, and I'm talking back in the late 80s. I'm probably dating myself, but replacing people doesn't automatically fix everything. So the old Universal, and I'm talking about the old school from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, they had this culture where they would literally mow everyone down, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then people would stand back up and they'd mow everyone down. And then a few people would stand up and they would mow them down. They keep going until just a few people were left. And those became the next leaders. And that may have worked in Hollywood, California. It did not work in Orlando, Florida, when Universal came to the East Coast. And they tried it, and it got a lot of pushback. A lot of us had come from the Disney culture, and it did not work. And it started to result in union grumblings, and we did not want a union in Florida. And eventually, kinder, gentler, and more sophisticated leadership took root, and Universal Orlando, as it has grown into 3 theme parks now, has an amazing culture. So just a little shout out there.
That's great. Yeah, it's fantastic. And again, right, firing people removes people. It doesn't create culture. Culture is created through expectations, clearly defined accountability, leadership, communication, systems, and clarity. If leaders replace employees without fixing the systems that created the dysfunction, they're eventually end up in the same problems again, right? They're just going to keep ending up because it's the culture. You can't just take a person and go, okay, we're going to change the culture now. Every person kind of changes the culture, but we really need to focus on the culture and kind of build that in there. So let's talk about, Chuck, better workplaces. The lesson isn't don't be afraid to fire people. The lesson isn't fire people faster. The lesson is to create a workplace where termination is rarely necessary because expectations, accountability, and leadership are present from the beginning. I love that statement, right? I think it's the leader. Again, I say it in my training. It's the manager. It's the leader. Like, get them doing that, right? But when coaching has failed, standards have collapsed, and behavior continues, leaders must be willing to act. The firing is the headline, tolerance is the lesson, workplace culture is the real story.
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this question, Chuck.
Sure.
And our listeners too. I want you to listen to this too. What are you tolerating today that you know you'll eventually have to address later?
Yeah.
Because
what are you tolerating today? Yeah, no, I like that. What are you tolerating today? Knowing you're just kicking the can down the road, because you're going to have to pick it up anyways at some point.
Yeah, and I always say, if you allow somebody to get away with something, you've just defined the new standard. Yeah. Right? If you allow somebody to come in late, maybe not one day, but 2 days in a row, 5 minutes late, okay, that's the new standard for everybody on that team. You defined it. I do believe that every employee deserves a great leader, and every organization deserves a culture where every employee can thrive in there.
And remember, you're listening to the HR Stories podcast. John and Chuck, we're glad you're here. And, well, there is a lesson in every story, and there certainly was in this one today. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Thank you.